Well, good evening. You're watching We Make the Way, a regular online series brought to you by the ACLU of Florida. I'm Micah Kubik, the ACLU of Florida's Executive Director, and we thank you for joining us tonight for a dynamite panel that will be discussing how to build power for progress in the South. Now, if this is your first time tuning into an installment of We Make the Way, first, we thank you. And second, you're in for a real treat tonight because of our guests. Every installment of We Make the Way is about taking a closer look at civil liberties and civil rights in Florida. We spend time talking about the most important issues facing the state, the way that our shared values of freedom, justice, equality, and democracy are under assault, and what's being done to defend those values from attack. We spend time talking about the vibrant movement to create a better Florida. And best of all, we do that by spending time talking with some of the most courageous, committed, and inspiring members of the movement, people who are putting in real work to make the way for progress. Now, we started this series a few weeks back with a discussion about building power in the South. It was immediately after the earth-shaking, nation-changing elections in our northern neighbor of Georgia. And it was very clear that over the last several years, folks committed to justice and equality had done the hard, grueling work of organizing and building power in that state. So we wanted to talk about what lessons there were to learn from Georgia and what work needs to be done right here in Florida. We had a great panel that night, but we also discovered that there was so much more still to say about this topic. And there's so much more still to do if we're to make Florida a state that really works well for everyone, not simply a privileged few who can get COVID vaccine clinics in their neighborhoods by contributing to Ron DeSantis' campaigns. Now, there's so much to do in order to make Florida a real leader in the South and in the nation, in defending and deepening the rights of everyone. And that's why tonight we want to talk about that subject again. What does it mean to build power in the South? How do we make Florida a leader in the South and in the nation? How do we deal with the complexities and uniqueness of this state while still reckoning with the historical and current realities? Now, there are a lot of people who want to pretend that Florida is not of the South at all, that its geography and climate may be Southern, but nothing else. That's ahistorical. After all, the state was part of the Confederacy. White Floridians loudly and proudly embraced Jim Crow, and many of our statewide policies continue to copy those of other Southern states more than they do other regions of the country. And so while there's no doubt that building power for progress in the South comes with some special challenges, it also comes with some hope and some helpful learnings. Because that same history is chock full of examples of regular people building power. There was even a time in the 1970s when Florida was considered the leading example of the new South, a place that was moving away from inequality and injustice. Even though that narrative was always overstated, the hype never matched reality, it wasn't completely imagined either. And so our friends in Georgia have taught us that it is possible to make change even in the difficult, fraught circumstances of the South. So tonight we want to talk with our guests about what we can do to build power and make a new Florida, one that demonstrates our values rather than decimates them. And to do that, we're very fortunate to have an all-star panel. It is definitely an all-star panel. And as I look at the faces on the screen just now, I have just realized that apparently tonight's installment of We Make the Way is also brought to you by the letter M. I don't really know how this happened. I swear it wasn't on purpose, but it looks like tonight we wound up with a panel made up entirely of people whose first names start with M. So we've got me, Micah, we've got Maya Ragsdale, we've got Maxwell Frost, and we've got Maya Brown. They are some of the most talented activists and leaders in the state. So I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. And I'm going to ask you to just go around and introduce yourselves to the audience very quickly. And I want to start with Maya Ragsdale, who's a staff attorney at Dream Defenders, doing really great work on a wide range of issues. And in 2020, I would also note the Miami New Times named Maya Ragsdale the best activist in South Florida for her work. So welcome, Maya, and tell us a little bit about yourself and Dream Defenders.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me on this on this panel. So like Micah said, my name is Maya Ragsdale. I am a Justice Catalyst Fellow and a staff attorney at Dream Defenders. Dream Defenders is a statewide organization led by young Black and Brown people who have a different vision of Florida where people have housing, where people have healthcare, where people aren't incarcerated, where we're not spending inordinate amounts of money on military spending, all of these different types of things. A state where all of its residents can thrive. In terms of my work at Dream Defenders, I kind of fall into this category that's called a movement lawyer. And so Dream Defenders has a number of different types of campaigns, all related to the criminal legal system. And so, we've had campaigns around, the massive investment of resources into the jail system in Miami, or the massive investment of resources into the police budget across both in Miami as well as in other jurisdictions across the state. And so my work at Dream Defenders is really to support those campaigns and to provide the kind of technical assistance that's sometimes necessary in decoding budgets, in understanding the way that the jail system operates, and other kinds of things that can sometimes be hard for, ordinary people to understand. The budget is not an easy document to go through if you aren't familiar with it. And so that's a lot of my work. My work is really focused on the criminal legal system. And my background, before I was a movement lawyer at Dream Defenders, I was a public defender, both in Miami as well as on the border between Mexico and Texas. And I was also a legal aid attorney. So I did a wide variety of different types of cases, from consumer defense to eviction defense to deportation defense to asylum cases, really kind of whatever somebody might need when they came into the legal aid. I provided that kind of support. So that's kind of my post-law school background. And, I've been in Miami for about 2 to 3 years now. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here with everybody.
Thank you so much, Maya. We're glad to have you. Maxwell Frost, I want to go to you next. Currently on the national staff at the March for Our Lives, the nation's leading youth-led organization, especially one calling for sensible policies about firearms. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first off, thank you for having me here. Hello, everybody. My name is Maxwell, like you said. And yeah, I'm excited to be here. So I'm currently the National Organizing Director at March for Our Lives, which is a fancy title that just means I get to work with young activists across the country and helping develop our almost 300 chapters nationwide. We have around 300 affiliates of groups of students all across the nation that are just working to live in a safer America and in a safer world. And so what we're really focused on right now is expanding the definition of what gun violence prevention means. I think a lot of times when people think about gun violence, they think about background checks, which looks like it's about to pass tomorrow, but background checks and assault weapons bans and things like that. March for Our Lives, we're really taking a step back and looking at a holistic approach to ending gun violence, what that really means. Gun violence is a symptom of broader oppression and systematic racism and patriarchy and capitalism. So we're looking at, how does poverty cause gun violence? How does the environment you live in cause gun violence? How does education levels in certain areas cause gun violence? How does racism cause gun violence? Police violence is gun violence. And looking at all of these different things and issues that impact this issue that we want to end. And so that's what we're really focused on this year, is attacking gun violence from a different point of view. And there's a lot of intersection with civil liberties and the way that we treat folks and the rights that they have. I mean, something that we're focused on too is ensuring that every decision we make is predicated on a foundation where we have a love of humanity and a love of every single human being. We're hoping that our legislators and our leaders can adopt that same mindset and framework, and we'd live in a better world. So I'm just really excited to be here to talk with you all about building power in the South. I believe in the South. I believe in Florida, even though some days it's hard. And but I'm excited to be here with y'all, and also excited to be back on an ACLU event. I worked for the ACLU of Florida during the Amendment 4 struggle, which was, I was just letting everyone else know, definitely one of the most honorable things I've ever done, working on that campaign and working to liberate the right to vote for folks, millions of folks. Then after that, I went to work for the ACLU national team on a campaign called Rights for All, which if you go to rightsforall.org, you can check out that campaign, moving presidential candidates on key political issues. And before that, just a ton of random campaigns, a bunch of boring stuff. But I'm really excited to be here with y'all here today. And so, yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Maxwell. And finally, we will go to a good friend, Maya Brown, one of Florida's most insightful and in-demand political professionals, shaking up the establishment. Share a little bit about yourself, Maya.
Well, thank you, Micah. It certainly is good to be back with my ACLU Florida family. Born and raised right here in Florida, matriculated through our public school system. So I know firsthand the struggles of what it means to grow up in a working class family here in Florida. And I also know, having worked in this process for almost a decade, that a better Florida is possible. I've had the opportunity to work on campaigns across the state, both for candidates and issue-based campaigns that imagined and put forth to Floridians the opportunity to elect or pass amendments to help create a better Florida. And in this kind of posture, in the current position that I'm in now, I'm helping to build more political power in the South by helping to elect Black women, Black folks, Black and brown folks across the state of Florida to lead in Florida's capital. Right now, because of our unfortunate loss in November, we're almost in a supermajority scenario in both chambers. And so I'm helping to identify folks who have the political courage to go to Tallahassee and fight on behalf of our issues. And in addition to that, helping on the advocacy side, identifying projects and programs to put forth and help our elected leaders as much as possible understand the breadth of their issues and their votes, and also helping those folks that got elected understand and communicate and message effectively what those issues are. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to share what it has been like to organize in Florida for the past decade, and kind of from my vantage point, what it means and what we need to help really build political power in Florida and to help flip Florida blue.
Great. Thank you so much. Again, thank you, Maya, Maxwell, and Maya for being with us on We Make the Way tonight. Also want to thank those of you who are watching this evening. If you have questions for our panelists as the conversation goes on, just go ahead and drop those in the comment section, and we will end the discussion tonight by addressing at least a few of those. So let's dive right into the discussion. And the first question that I want to pose to our panel is this. Is Florida a southern state at all? Is it a southern state? In the civil rights and civil liberties context, is Florida like the rest of the South, or is it not? Maya Ragsdale, can we go to you first?
Sure. It's actually a funny question because for me, you know, my dad is actually from Georgia, and you know, he considered, like, when I was growing up, he always told me, you know, Georgia is the South, Georgia is the deep South. And when I moved to Florida, he told me, oh, you know, Florida is not the South. Like Florida is something else. We never considered Florida to be the South when I was growing up. But you know, I think it's kind of what you said when you introduced this, when you introduced this panel. You know, Florida was a Confederate state, and you see that in every aspect of the way that this state functions. And even in Miami, right? Miami it's culturally very different from the rest of the state, yet you still see the same kinds of you know, the same kind of policies, the same kind of ordinances that get passed here. And so, yeah, I would say it is definitely a southern state. In the area that I work in, Florida has some of the absolute harshest policies related to the criminal legal system in the country. We have one of the highest rates of incarceration of Black folks in the country. We still go by, this law that requires people to serve 85% of their sentences, while the rest of the country is at now 65%. We are one of the few states in the country that pay people $0 for their labor while they're in prison. We are, it's one thing after another. And so, I would say that it's just very clear when working on any kind of, issue-based campaign, any kind of issue-based area in Florida, that we are operating in the South. And I think right now we're seeing that with HB1 as well. There's been massive, I guess another area is, I used to do some work on Amendment 4 in Florida as well. And you just see massive voter disenfranchisement of Black folks and redistricting laws. It's just one thing after another to try to disenfranchise people, to try to make it so that, the same kind of, racist legislators are the ones who control the way that things in Florida move. And so, yeah, I would say that absolutely, in terms of the way that Florida functions historically, geographically, and currently, it's very clear that we are in the state of Florida and that we're in the South.
Thanks, Maya. Let's go to Maxwell next. What do you say, Maxwell? Is Florida part of the South, or is it a special little snowflake?
I would definitely say we're part of the South. And, this is interesting. This is something I hear. I grew up here in Florida, and you hear it growing up. It's like, Florida isn't the real South. It isn't the real South. And I always believed that. Then a few years ago, I got to live in South Carolina and Georgia for a while. And I kind of saw where people were coming from. But I also think when people say that Florida isn't the South because it's so different, it's also kind of dogging on all the other states in the South, right? Every state in the South is different. They all have unique things with unique people, unique histories that make them different from each other. And so I kind of dismiss the notion that just because Florida is so different because of our demographics or stuff like that, that we can't be part of the South. We are part of the South. I mean, we think about things like the Gullah Geechee Nation, which runs from Beaufort, South Carolina, all the way down to Jacksonville, shared heritage through slavery, taking the best of our tradition of Black people and using it to preserve culture. That's in Florida. It's in Georgia. It's in South Carolina, right? We see the same thing to what Maya was saying. Like, if we look at the way the state legislature works in Florida, it looks and sounds like state legislatures all across the South. Tallahassee isn't much different than Columbia, South Carolina, right? We see that there's a lot of the same bills coming up, like we see HB1, this censorship and repression bill. There are copycats of this bill all around the South, right? It's not unique to just Florida. And so I would say we're part of the South. We share a lot of the worst history. We also share some of the best traditions of Black folks, best traditions of Latinos, Cubanos, people all across our state. And so we are unique, but we are still part of the South.
Thank you, Maxwell. Maya Brown, what do you think? What's your take?
So we certainly are, Micah. We hear a lot about how Florida is a reflection of the nation. As Florida goes, so does the country, which we have seen on several occasions that not to be true. Probably thank you for that, especially in November. And then even more specifically, we drill that down and say Central Florida, of course, is also this representation of the country. I grew up in Volusia County. I'm in a small town called DeLand. So I know firsthand, there was one high school, two middle schools. Everybody knew everyone. So I've seen firsthand how Florida has its Southern roots and still continues to this day. And just for context, I moved to Tampa to go to college, and that was a metropolis in comparison to the small city that I grew up in. And even, that was almost 30 years ago, but even today, right, you can travel to the Panhandle and even some parts of Central Florida and South Florida and still see these remnants of Southern heritage, right? And not in Southern heritage in terms of pride, but in disparaging folks and making sure that there's clear distinctions between what it means to have privilege and what it means to not have privilege. And right now, especially because we had a president in the White House who led and was rooted in white supremacy, folks are leaning in that in Florida to make their cause even greater. There's still flags in the panhandle of folks saying "Make America Great Again," all in Florida, right? And folks really leaning into this historical racial injustice, especially relative to this idea of civil liberties. So we have a long way to go. I'm appreciative of the fact that folks come to Florida, especially when it comes to partisan politics, and help us move our state a little bit further to the left. Folks coming from the north and, immigrating here from all across the country, but there is still deep roots of racial injustice and systemic injustice that we have to continue to fight through and make progress on. And that, I think, directly impacts who we elect for governor. Case in point, y'all remember when Ron DeSantis had his ad, reading a Trump book to his kids, when he was running for governor. What does that say if, a gubernatorial candidate is using that and understanding that that's going to influence people in the state or in the district that they're running in? So I think that says a lot about who we are as a state and what we still need to do.
Great. Thank you all very much. So we talked a little bit about where we are. Let's talk about where we can go and how we get there. Over the last few weeks, Georgia has been on my mind and everyone else's, I think. This was a state whose politics seemed to transform before our very eyes, and in a way that has had a huge impact on the whole country. Since then, a lot of folks have scrambled to make sense of it all, to identify what they think caused that transformation, to learn lessons from it. I think I've heard a different theory about it all every single day for the last 2 months. So now's your chance to share your theories about it with us. What lessons did the change in Georgia teach us? And what lessons are there that the movement here in Florida can learn from our neighbors in Georgia? Maya Brown, can we start with you this time?
Sure. I think the first thing is to trust Black women. Period. We need to make sure that we are leaning into the folks who we claim to uplift, folks who look like the diversity of our communities and put them in senior leadership positions. We need to honor that. And I think, with the leadership of Stacey Abrams, that actually came into fruition. So that's the first thing. And I think the second lesson that we learned is how important relational organizing is. In Florida, we have this horrible habit of doing, like, in terms of it being cyclical, we build this infrastructure for a campaign, we lose, and we break it all down and have to rebuild it every 2 years. I think Georgia demonstrated this multi-cycle plan that built deep relationships with the community and organized year round. And that's something that we for certain need to participate and include in our institutions here in the state of Florida.
Great. Maxwell, what do you think? What lessons did you learn from Georgia and how do they apply here in Florida?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think first off, obviously, hats off to Stacey Abrams and all the people working to get people registered to vote and out to vote. But I'd like to take a step back because I hear a lot of folks say that Georgia became more progressive. I think Georgia was relatively in the same place it was 4 years prior to that. What changed was turnout. People actually hearing a message that they cared about and going out and voting for it. So when I hear people talk crap about Florida, I say we need to give Florida a bit more credit, because when we see ballot initiatives like Amendment 4, Amendment 2, medical marijuana pass with flying colors with far more votes than any statewide candidates ever gotten in our state's history, that tells us where a lot of folks are, right? And so, a good case here with Georgia is if we look at the voting disparity between Warnock and Ossoff. Warnock was more progressive. He spoke more to things that people cared about, quite frankly, and he got more votes in every single district. And so I don't say that as a political thing. It's mainly when we speak to issues that impact everyday people. When we talk about progressive things that usually state parties shy away from, we get people excited about becoming a part of the political process. That's why folks like Bernie Sanders and AOC and folks like this strike a chord with people who usually aren't involved with politics because they're talking directly to things that they care about. And so that hats off to Warnock and Stacey Abrams for really pushing those narratives. And they're not narratives, but they're actually things that we can do to help people. And so I think that's really a lesson we can learn here in Florida. When we look at Brother Gillum and the amazing work he did in the primary, he was very progressive, talking about those same issues. When the general came around, things were moderated. We lost. We got to learn from these things and move forward. So that way we can become and speak to the issues that people actually care about and solutions that can actually help everyday people.
Wonderful. Thank you. Maya Ragsdale, what do you say? What lessons did you take from Georgia?
I think one of the most important things that I heard coming out of the Georgia elections was how long organizations like Stacey Abrams' organization and the other organizations that were in that coalitional relationship, how long it took, to build this kind of voter registration processes, voter turnout, voter education, all of these different things. It was a very long-term investment of resources, of time, of labor. And, I know in Florida, there's these massive influxes of money that come in every election cycle. And I think, figuring out how to sustain this kind of investment over time is just so important. During the Georgia elections, I was seeing articles about how some of these organizations reached every single person in their constituent group. And I was just absolutely amazed by that, I think that when I think about that kind of lesson for Florida, I think about the people who I typically work with. It's often people who don't, we'll talk about, okay, we have this particular issue. Who has power over this particular issue? And oftentimes, people don't necessarily know the difference between their mayor versus their commissioner versus their governor versus their state legislator versus Trump versus Biden. These are all an elected official is an elected official. And so I think that oftentimes, these kinds of community-based organizations are so powerful because they can do that voter education. In addition, the voter registration is absolutely essential. And in addition, being able to do voter education in a way that is actually connecting the issues that people are dealing with on a daily basis to the people in power who actually have the ability to change that particular thing is so important. And when I saw the organizations that were, the number of organizations that were involved in this effort in Georgia, I really noticed that there were so many organizations that, yes, focused on voter registration and voter turnout kinds of issues, but in addition, also ran campaigns during the kind of, the in-between times that were engaged in these types of issues that just kind of affected people on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you for your insights on that one. As a reminder, if you have a question for the panel, just type it into the chat. We'll be able to answer a few of them at the end of our discussion. All right, so let's say that we do those things. Let's say that we learn the lessons of Georgia and elsewhere, that we employ them here to build a strong, resilient, inspiring movement. But of course, we don't build movements for their own sake. Their purpose isn't just to exist, but is instead to push for meaningful change on policy issues. So I want to ask each of you, what do you think is the single most pressing issue facing Floridians right now? What issue is most in need of a strong, powerful movement to advance it? And Maxwell, let's go to you for this one.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think there's a ton, and not to scapegoat an answer here, but I think it's all of them, and it's connecting them all in a way that helps folks understand what's going on. And what I mean by that is, when I talk about young folks a lot with people, they don't quite understand that the age of the single issue voter is going away, quite literally, not to be morbid, but it's ending. young folks care about everything. An example is that, we were doing a national call, and one of like our 13 or 14-year-old chapter members asked a question, was like, how does this impact a disabled Indigenous person during this time of the year with this and that and that? And I was like, oh my God, I didn't think like that when I was 13, 14 years old. And like, folks are really thinking about the most at risk, every issue that can impact them, and how do the decisions we make as citizens when we're voting and our leaders make, how does that impact folks like that? So I think that in order for us to really win, it's going to be more than just zeroing in on one issue. I think it's going to have to be us really talking about taking a step back and painting the picture of how all these issues are connected, and how, whoever's running or whatever ballot initiative is up, how it's going to impact people's daily life. So yeah.
Great. Thank you. Maya Ragsdale, what do you think? What issue or issues are most in need of a powerful movement right now?
I actually completely agree with Maxwell. For me, I focus on the criminal legal system and the jail system, because that's something that's impacted me in my own life. But I would have a really hard time saying that there's any one particular thing that is the most important. When I think about why it is that people end up in the system, I think about the fact that, if you don't have housing, you get arrested on a trespass charge, or you get arrested on a burglary charge. If you don't have healthcare, I had clients who ended up going to CVS and stealing, like little kinds of things to help with different medical issues that they had. It's just, I think it's like this very, very cyclical thing where it's like, you don't have a job, you don't have money, you don't have housing, you don't have one thing after another that should be guaranteed, should be provided by the state. So you set people up to fail. And then in addition to that, you also have discriminatory kind of policing policies and things like that. And so as a result, people end up in the system. And then when they're coming out, you face even more barriers. So it's just this constant cycle. And so for me, I don't see any one issue as more important. I think that, these are all connected to the different types of kind of economic policies, the economic system that we exist within. And, I think that the connection between these issues has been something that has been so powerful, that's been coming out of the discourse, I feel like, over the last, 5-10 years. It's no longer about, mass incarceration as just mass incarceration. It's now about mass incarceration as part of this larger cycle of caging people who, are left out of our economy in so many different types of ways, and in this way that is very, that's racist and is based in a white supremacist state. And so I completely agree with Maxwell. I think it's really about connecting the issues and connecting them in a way that's very clear and very easy to understand for kind of, the ordinary person.
Thank you. Maya Brown, do you want to agree or disagree with the other folks on the panel here?
Yeah, I was going to say, Micah, it seems like there's solidarity here as we think about the answer to this question. I agree. I think policy, especially in Florida, is intersectional, right? And so I won't necessarily, regurgitate what Maya just said, but I absolutely agree with that. What I think is causing me most to not sleep at night right now is the proposals coming out of the Florida legislature, particularly in the Senate, that's trying to impact that is voter suppression. That's exactly what it is, right? They're trying to get rid of vote by mail drop boxes, reshape how vote by mail is done in the state of Florida. And also there's a proposal I understand about suppressing access to early voting. We know that there is a fear that these political leaders have about our access to our vote, right? And so they understand that they continue to suppress that access to democracy, that they will continue to hold this power, and the influence of special interests will continue to bankroll their campaigns. And I think Georgia is a great example of what happens when we utilize that power, when we empower others to utilize that power to vote. And there is fear, I think, among all of the southern states, but particularly in Florida, that that's going to happen here. And they are, because they have the power, kind of proactively trying to mitigate that and prohibit that from happening. So that's something that I think we should all be concerned about, especially as we consider, what's important to us and civil liberties.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's take it one step further. No matter what the issue or issues, no matter how they are connected, related, there's always a host of actions that need to be taken in order to create real change for real people in real communities. Some of those actions are short term, some of them are a long, hard haul. So let's focus on just the next 5 years. What specific concrete changes need to happen in the next 5 years to give us a Florida that works for everyone? Maya Ragsdale, you want to take a crack at it first?
Yeah, sure. It's a big question. I really believe in the power of community organizing. I think that when you bring people together who are dealing with a similar issue, and really go through this process of, what is the shared problem? What is the reason for the shared problem? How do you change the shared problem? And you start identifying, who are the actors who are involved. What are the processes that you can be engaged in to try to change a particular thing? I've just seen in my own work how transformational that can be, and I guess that for me, I think that there's a number of different types of organizations that are so important. And I think for me specifically, in terms of the work that I do, that's the kind of work that I feel like needs to be kind of expanded and really kind of thought. Like, I think that we need to think about it even more deeply. I think that I've noticed that in Miami, there's kind of like a dearth of organizations, or there's kind of a lack of organizations that really organize people who aren't already part of organizations, or who don't already have like an inclination towards being involved in some kind of political action or some kind of political issue. And everybody's dealing with something. Everybody's going through something, because and by everybody, I just mean, working class people are constantly dealing with different types of issues. And so I just feel like there's a major need to really focus on building community-based organizations that people who are not politicized in terms of their involvement in organizations already, that people can come into, and that people can serve as a place where people, can come together, can see things collectively, and can kind of learn about about the electoral process, or learn about the way that this system kind of functions in that way, in a way that's very, very personal, but is also, very empowering. So that for me is, that for me is my biggest focus, and I would say the thing that I feel like is most important in my own work.
Yeah, very, very important. Thank you, Maya. Maya Brown, what do you think? What is the action item, the specific thing that we need to do over the next 5 years or so?
I think the issue that we face right now is the lack of collaboration. Our grassroots and C3, C4 partners are doing amazing work, and there's tables that exist for that communication. But there is a very clear disconnect between our progressive friends and the party. And I think that, and we can litigate whether or not who's in charge there, and how we need to change that to ensure and build trust. But I think at the crux of it, we need to build better collaboration and communication so that we aren't inefficiently spending resources in our state. It's not that we lack finances and money coming to the state of Florida, but I think we're doing the same thing and not having conversations. So the impact to voters is ineffective. So I think that's the first thing we need to do, is to build that bridge and make sure that we're working together there. Secondly, we need a multi-cycle plan. We shouldn't be going into every election cycle just hoping we have a good candidate to run for state house and state senate across the state of Florida. What are we doing to make sure that we're recruiting good candidates, good staff, and have supportive institutions to make sure those things happen, and start to take back power in both chambers? And I think that we need to build that plan. We need everyone at the table to do that and make sure that we have a plan to spend those resources to make sure that comes into fruition. And someone, I think in the chat, said local elections matter. That helps, making sure that we invest in folks to run for local government. And this concept of building a bench comes into fruition when that happens.
Thank you, Maya. Maxwell, what do you think? What do we need to do over the next 5 years or so? What's the specific actions we need to take?
Yeah, definitely. And, I'm thinking about the last question you asked, where it was like, what's the single issue? And for me, it's equity, and that's where we really need to focus on, both within the system and outside of the system. So it's the answer to both questions. What do we need to focus on? We need to focus on equity. And that means a ton of different things. Within the system, we need to focus on electing morally just leaders that actually care about our lives, that actually care about us living our best lives. Because I think a lot of times when we get into politics, we get pigeonholed into fighting for what people need to survive. But we never think about what folks need to thrive, like to actually enjoy their lives, to chase their wildest dreams, right? And so I refuse that. And this is one of the reasons I love the Dream Defenders and the work they do. Is like, one of their main things is like, we deserve more. And one of the saddest things about working in politics, I'm sure both Micahs can agree with this, and you, Micah, is the more you talk with people across the country and across the state, the more you find out how much people don't think they deserve anything from their government. And it's really sad. You realize how much people don't expect things from their government. They don't feel like they deserve it because it's not normal. And what myself and a ton of other organizers and folks are saying is, we deserve the most. We deserve it all. And so I think we really need to come into voting for folks and voting for candidates that share that mindset. We need politicians who actually care about us. We need politicians who love us as human beings, right? And like when Cori Bush got elected, one of the first things she said was, I love you. I love the people who didn't vote for me. I love the people who did vote for me. And we need to get more into that mindset when we're recruiting candidates, when people are getting to run for office, and when we're judging folks. Something that I always tell my organizers is, we need to see the world through the eyes of the most vulnerable. And then we need to use that vision on the world to make every decision we make. And so I want to see more politicians, and the word politician is a bad word sometimes. I want it to be a good word. I want us to think about politicians and think about the best people in our community, because we need to have better folks who aren't corrupt running for office. So in terms of what we need to do over the next 5 years, everyone needs to get out voting. We need to make sure that we're voting in the right people up and down the ballot. City council, comptroller. Some people don't know what that is, but we need a good comptrollers. We need every single position on the local, state, and national level needs to be filled with poor and working folks who understand what it means to not only struggle, but understand what it means to love other people and make decisions on a daily basis that impact people. And so I think that's really what we need to do. And to Maya's point too, we need to work more collaboratively. Something that we saw, especially during this last cycle in Florida, is a lot of headbutting. But something, and when I was working on Amendment 4, something we saw there was a unified front of I don't even remember the number, but 25 plus organizations and movements working on one single thing, and we saw victory, and over 2 million people saw liberation. And so we need to take a page from that book and work together and get this stuff done. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maxwell. Yeah, politicians who are capable of loving us would be a wonderful thing. Having politicians who are capable of love at all, in some cases, would be a wonderful thing, a wonderful start. So last question from me before we get to some audience questions. I want to step away from the mechanics for a moment and go back to what Maxwell was just talking about, what change looks like. I don't think I'm putting words in any of your mouths if I say that today Florida is not a state that works equally or well for everyone. Racial disparities continue to remain rampant and often are growing. Gender disparities are pervasive, growing. We have a xenophobe as the governor. That is the status quo. But what would a Florida that does work for everyone really look like? What would be different? Tell us about your vision for Florida. Paint us a picture. What would look different? Maya Ragsdale, can you start us out?
Sure. I'm going to plug Dream Defenders Freedom Papers. I would say that, you know, a different Florida would look, I mean, a Florida that works for all would look completely different. I think it would be a Florida where people aren't struggling to pay rent. It would be a Florida where people aren't struggling to eat. It would be a Florida where we don't have people living on the streets. It would be a Florida where people can go to the doctor without worrying about, you know, whether or not they have insurance. Every aspect of just daily life, I feel like would look different. And yeah, you know, I think that one of the reasons why, you know, Florida looks the way it does is because the resources are allocated in such a way that the money is being put into, you know, the criminalization of, you know, basically into the carceral system, whether it's policing, jails, prisons, immigration detention centers, all of these different types of, you know, all these different types of institutions are getting billions and billions of dollars every year. And then suddenly there's no money available for all of the things that people need. And like Maxwell said, in addition to that, people don't feel that they deserve these things. And so, yeah, I think a different vision of Florida would be one where the budget looks different, where the state legislature's budget looks different. It's one where the county budgets would look different. You know, it's something that it's just thinking about what that would feel like on a daily basis. You know, it feels so far from where we are in the state of Florida, but also, you know, I would just say in general, I've lived in a lot of places. I've lived in Chicago, in LA, in Boston. I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska. I grew up in Michigan as well. Every place that I've lived in has these issues. And so it's not just a different Florida, it's also a different kind of value system that exists in, that it's a value system that I feel like doesn't necessarily exist in any part of the country right now. And so, you know, I think it's just it's a shift in terms of what we feel, what elected officials feel like, you know, people deserve, and then actually shifting those resources in a way that allows for that to happen.
Great, thank you. Maxwell, tell us about your vision for Florida. What looks different?
A lot of things, but I'll tell you what would be different for me, and a lot of the same things Maya said, is a government that centers, again, I'll sound like a broken record, but you know, a government that centers the most vulnerable. Because when the folks that are most at risk have the same opportunity and the same sense of liberation that a lot of us have in certain aspects, we all stand to benefit. And you know, I come from the Christian tradition, which, you know, there's a verse where Jesus said, "What you do to the least of these, you do to me." And I feel like taking the best of that tradition and using that in what we do is important. And so looking out for the folks who are most at risk and the folks who need the most help. We live in the richest country in the entire world, and we have almost 100 people that are dying a day due to gun violence. We have folks who can't afford their next meal. A large percentage of our population doesn't have enough money in the bank to cover a $200 unexpected expense. These are things that we can fix. It's not that radical. But the problem with things within Florida is we give billions to sugar. We give millions to private prisons. And there's a lot that we need to do in this state, and a lot of it lies within the budget to be in a better place. So when I close my eyes and I imagine a better Florida, I imagine a Florida with no prisons, where people have to go and spend the rest of their life for things that they're a victim of as well, like poverty and our racist criminal justice system. And that starts all the way in kindergarten, especially in this state. It's a Florida where folks don't have to worry about where their next meal is going to come from. I believe housing should be a right in the richest country in the world. And so I believe no one should have to worry about having running water, a roof over their head. I don't think people should have to worry about food scarcity. I just think, when people ask me, what's your politics? I always say my politics are I want people to live their best lives. That's it. That, in the simplest terms, I want people to live fruitful, amazing lives where they can love their family and they can work hard, but not work to live. You know what I mean? And not live to work, but just enjoy their life. And so I know that's pretty broad. I could sit here and name all the issues that we need to get better on, but I think it all lives under the umbrella of equity for all people. And there's a difference between that and equality, because equality is when everyone gets the same thing, and equity is when we look at the history of what's happened to folks and where they're at, and we allocate resources to help the most vulnerable so they can truly get to a place of liberation. And so that's really what when I close my eyes and I think about a better Florida, that's what I think about. A lot of folks are suffering, and it's not because they live beyond their means, it's because they were denied the means to live, and we can do a lot better around that.
Absolutely. Maya Brown, what about you? What do you see when you envision a better Florida?
Sure, Micah, when I kind of think about what this pictorial vision looks like, I think government and the folks who are elected to lead, they look like the folks on this panel. They look like the folks who live in this state. They have similar backgrounds and experiences because those lived experiences help inform policy making. So that's what that looks like, creating better access for folks to run for office, win, and lead. Lead with compassion, lead with understanding, with empathy, so that the decision-making process centers the hardworking families and Floridians in Florida who need the most help. I think also when I think about a vision of Florida, it's one that understands as a Black woman that I'm not afraid to live here. When I think about living in on the I-4 corridor that, less than 10 years ago, Trayvon Martin was murdered in Sanford, and then Marquise McLaughlin here in Clearwater, that I'm not afraid as a Black woman to birth Black children in this state, and that we are doing radical reform as it relates to policing in the state of Florida, that we're not cowarding to law enforcement, but we are having, if possible, collaborative conversations to reimagine what policing looks like. And Maya hit it right on the head. We see how or what folks prioritize by what's in their pocketbook, right? And the budgets help influence that. So right after kind of the civil unrest that happened across the country in the summer after the death of George Floyd, we saw police departments and cities, increase their budgetary allocations to police departments. What are we doing? What does that say? It's clear that those folks did not care about how folks who look like you and me feel about the issues of what it means to be Black in America and to be policed as Black and brown people in America. And so we have to ensure that we're holding those folks accountable. And I think my vision for Florida has a pathway to do that. And that accountability is impactful and actually leads to reform.
Great. Thank you all very much for those really wonderful visions of what the state could be. I'll tell you, my vision for Florida starts with the three of you being in charge and Ron DeSantis' only power being screaming at the TV at home. I think that would make the state a much better place if the three of you were in charge. So we're going to go over to some audience questions now. We have one here that says, how should you respond to people who say that they don't contact their elected officials because those elected officials don't care? That is, how do you respond to folks who feel so disempowered that even when they want to use their voice, they don't because they think elected officials don't care what they have to say? Who wants to take a crack at that? Maya Brown, any thoughts? I'm sorry, I can't just say Maya.
I know, right? I was like, Maya, I gotta pause a little bit to see what comes next, but vote them out, right? And I apologize for being so hyperbolic with that answer, but it's true, right? Like, if you want folks in elected office to care about you, change who the folks in elected office are. And that means, and we kind of talked about what that looks like to make that happen. But that should motivate and be a call to action for folks to take charge and respond. the elected officials aren't there because God created this space specifically for them. They're there because we elect them, right? We're there because we gave them this job. And something my mom used to say, I put you in this world, I can take you out. And so I think about that when I think about, the role of elected officials. And we need to lean into that power more.
Thanks. Maxwell, what do you think? What should we say to those folks who feel that way?
Yeah, definitely. This is something that comes up all the time in our organization. Folks saying, I'm speaking with a lot of young people on campus or around my community, and folks just don't feel the agency to contact their legislators. What I always tell them is, I think it's easy for us a lot of times to jump to conclusions and judge folks, right? I mean, I used to do it all the time. My friend tells me he didn't vote. I go, what the hell's wrong with you? This is the most important election of our life. They're all the most important election of our life, but but over the past few years, I've noticed that's not the right way to go about it. We got to validate the root of people's concern, right? Like, there's a reason why a lot of people don't feel agency to contact legislators within our system. And it's because they feel like they're not being represented. They feel like folks don't have their best interests at mind, and so they don't care about it. And so I think coming at it from a point where you can sit down and have a conversation and talk about what this really means for our country and for their personal life is important. All politics are local. And when you sit down with folks and you explain it to them, I think you'll create more of a lifelong advocate for justice rather than someone who's just going to cast the ballot once. And that's the difference between mobilizing voters and educating voters. When you mobilize someone to vote, they go do it, and then you hit them up again in 4 years or whatever. When you educate someone and you take the extra time to have the conversation with them, you inspire a conviction in someone that changes their life forever. And so when they go cast that vote or they go send that letter, they come back and they ask what's next. And that's what we need to be spending time on. That's an answer to one of the last questions. Is that's how we can win Florida, is by spending less time mobilizing people and more time educating folks and inspiring folks. So that way, when this happens again in the future, they're the ones that are going out inspiring people.
Great, thank you. So I want to get to one other question from the audience here before we have to wrap up. And that question is, what is the best thing that people can do today to make a difference? Do you have a specific call to action that you want to give to folks that they could do today? Maya Ragsdale, what do you say?
My answer actually, I think, also is kind of my answer to the last question as well. I think that joining an organization is one of the most important things that a person can do. The reason why I say that is because I think there's a number of different types of ways that a person can yield power. I think that when people say that an elected official is not responding to them, I think it's because of the reality that elected officials respond to people that they feel like are going to have the power to impact them in every election campaign. And so some people have power by the fact that they are in influential roles in society. They have money, they might have name recognition. That's one type of power that some people, and a very small number of people have. I think that the power of ordinary people is the power to be able to, kind of like Maya, the other Maya said, is the power to primary somebody. And the only way that you can do that is if you have enough people who are organized in order to, make the decision not to vote for somebody. And I think that the easiest way to do that is to be part of an organization, to join organizations that are organizing voters, that are organizing constituents around particular issues in the in-between time, kind of between campaigns. And those same organizations are also so often so involved in the electoral cycle as well, educating their base, educating their constituents around who it is that is up for election. And so, we saw that a lot at the last election. My organization specifically, Dream Defenders, we spent a lot of time, educating people on the mayor in Miami. That was such an important race here. We spent a lot of time organizing and talking to our base around a sheriff in one part of the state, around state attorneys in another part of the state. So there's important elections. There are important elections that happen periodically, and in the in-between time, joining organizations that are actually trying to kind of build bigger and bigger membership bases that can then serve as places that are engaged in voter education, all these different types of things, I think is extremely, extremely important. And so my advice is join an organization that has some kind of transformational vision of what the state of Florida, could look like, and become an organized person by joining an organization that organizes people.
Great. Maxwell, a call to action for folks. What can folks do today?
Similar to what Maya said, I think the first thing is think about the issues in your area that you care about, the things you want to see change. And like Maya said, join an organization. And when we use the term organization, we're not even just saying like it don't have to be a C3 or anything. There's a lot of on the ground movements and folks that are making differences in their community that need volunteers. It could be something as quick as helping to clean out community fridge and helping, in mutual aid efforts in your community. It could also be speaking at your city council meetings or speaking at your local school board meetings or helping folks. Something I always tell people is advocacy can seem a bit daunting at points because I think we see the news, we see people speaking and people get a little nervous about it, but there's a place for everyone in these movements. There's things that anyone can do. And so what I always say is, reach out to people who are doing the work already in your community. Tell them you want to help and you want to make a difference, and you'll be surprised how it could change your life too, because this isn't just about a means to an end, which I know is kind of weird to hear in politics. We are trying to make a difference, but in between, and I saw someone talk about our indigenous siblings in the chat, this is something that we see a lot with our indigenous siblings who advocate for clean water and their land. It is a journey that is important in advocacy of itself. So like when we are recruiting volunteers and getting people involved in the process, yes, we're doing it to elect someone or make a difference, but all that time in between, we're changing people's lives. Like people's lives are being changed. And so if you're looking to get involved with advocacy and fighting for your community, please do it because we deserve better, but because also it's going to change your life. And I definitely think it's going to make you and everyone else better human beings.
Thank you. Maya Brown, what do you have? What would you encourage folks to do?
I'll just retweet what Maya and Maxwell said about, finding an organization to get involved with. I tell folks all the time, take what you're passionate about, issues you care about, and your skill, and that'll drive you to an organization that you can do impactful work there. So I would just encourage folks to really sit with that, think through how they want to show up. And there's a host of organizations probably in your community doing fantastic work. Show up there and they will welcome you with open arms, and push them to do more, right? Like if you see that those organizations aren't kind of maybe doing the things that we talked about on this panel, show up with those bright ideas and a plan and a proposal, and step up to lead, because we need the diversity of those ideas in these spaces.
Great, thank you very much. So we're out of time for questions, but I want to give a great big thank you to this great panel, tonight's M Squad of Maya Brown, Maxwell Frost, and Maya Ragsdale. Thanks to all of you for the great work that you're doing to build a movement, to build a new Florida, to build a new South. You're doing amazing work in a very challenging time, and so we thank you for that. And as we come to the end of tonight's installment of We Make the Way, we also want to remind you about something deeply disturbing that is happening here in Florida. Because even as we do this segment tonight, the Florida legislature is continuing to consider Governor Ron DeSantis's #1 priority for the year. With all that is happening in the country, you might think that the governor's top priority would be distributing the COVID vaccine as widely and rapidly as possible, or dealing with all of the challenges that the pandemic has created. But you would be wrong, because the governor's top priority this year is instead a bill that effectively criminalizes peaceful protest. It's a bill called HB1. Several of the folks on our panel referenced it earlier tonight. And it's a bill whose goal seems to be to see just how offensive, outrageous, illegal, unconstitutional, and odious a single bill can be before it spontaneously combusts. So far, that hasn't happened, but instead the bill has wended its way through the legislature. We've talked about it here before. It's a bill that says that if you attend a protest that someone later considers disruptive, you can be guilty of a crime just by attending that protest, whether you were involved in the disruption or not. It hands down very harsh penalties and allows folks who engage in violence against peaceful protesters to be immune from accountability. Now, the governor and his allies say that the bill is necessary to control violence at protests, to instill order, conveniently forgetting that that hasn't been a thing in many of the protests that have happened here in Florida. And even when it has been, there are boatloads of laws against violence and disruption that have already been used. Governor DeSantis says that the bill is necessary to stop events like the coup attempt on January 6th, that the bill is a reaction to it. Now, that's very curious because he actually introduced the proposal back in the fall, months before January 6th. And so the only way that the January coup attempt can be the reason for the law is if the governor has discovered time travel and forgot to tell the rest of us about it. No, the real reason the governor is pushing the bill is the same reason he proposed it earlier this year, and that's because he disagrees with the Black Lives Matter protests that have swept the state, that he continues to disagree with the idea that Black Lives Matter or that racial equality is an urgent need. And so rather than doing anything about that, the governor has decided to try and make it a crime for people to speak out at all. And so that's why tonight we want to again encourage you to be in touch with your state legislator and let them know that you strongly, strongly oppose HB1, that you oppose criminalizing peaceful protest, and that you think that this is a real disgrace. We have many ways for you to take action on our website at aclufl.org. We are encouraged that folks from all backgrounds and walks of life are coming together to oppose this nonsense. And I think that if we really stand together, hopefully we can defeat this terrible, terrible bill. So that wraps up We Make the Way for this evening. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Micah Kubik, the Executive Director of the ACLU of Florida. On behalf of all of us at the ACLU of Florida, thank you again to our marvelous panelists. Thanks for being with us. And until next time, keep making the way for freedom, for justice, and for equality. Good night.